is an amazing year to be part of the global movement for nonviolence, for justice, for peace. This is an amazing year. Have you noticed? From Egypt to northern Iraq, Salaminia, the Arab Spring, from Wall Street from Wisconsin to Wall Street and beyond, to so many cities and towns in this, not just this nation. I was at Occupy Toronto a week and a half ago, and was talking with someone who was in Occupy London, Ontario, the week before. All over the place. It's been an amazing year in the nonviolent movement for transformation of the systems that have held us from each other. And I've wondered, so how has this year been here? And I've just heard highlights from the Peace Center's part of that movement, and I've heard little shadows of other circles, the overlapping circle of the Occupy Wichita movement and the overlapping circle of Sunflower, and I'm sure there are other overlapping circles that I haven't heard from yet, but I might in the next couple of days. And, people have been telling me what you've been up to, and it's very good. And yet I hear a bit of weight, and I know that in part comes from being in this particular place where the military and the military-industrial complex are enormous in relation to the rest of the economy and population. This particular place, the home of perhaps the largest funder of some of the most racist and reactionary national politics. This place where the economic woes of the world does land, and lands, of course, on the backs of the ones already struggling with the economy. And then I hear today that to add insult to industry, or injury to insult, anyway, it kind of fits, actually. That solutions are proposed in public meetings that make a mockery of the poor, make a mockery of what it is to be family, as if marriage were a solution for poverty. Good Lord. What a mess this country is in. Anyway, so I want to tell you that South Central Kansas is in a really importantly good place to notice that there is hope. That you are in a strategic place. You are in a perfect place to be working at this social justice movement. And part of that, I speak as someone who moved from here to Chicago, where it's not that the majority of Chicago is peace and justice. I mean, we have Mayor Emanuel, and before that we had, anyway, I won't go into Chicago. But here, all you have to do is look around the room, and you can remember that it takes us all. You look around this room, look around, you know each other. Look around. You love each other. I bet you even fight with each other. Is it true? Do you argue?
Yep.
Do you differ about what's most important? about how to do this work sometimes, about whether you need a house or not to do it from, about one or two other things?
Yep.
Yes. Good. That means you're thinking. That means you actually are working together, not pretending. But you know each other. And you can tell, therefore, that it takes us all. And if in those fights you have lost anyone, I want you to bring them right now in your mind to this room. If there's someone who would have been here last year, but because of difficulties in this body, they're not here right now, bring them right now in this room. And don't you dare leave them behind. Because in a peace community this tight-knit, you're in a place to know. In a big city like Chicago, you could forget it. But in a place like this, you're in a place to know and remember. It takes us all. Some of you who were in that whole bus load of South Central Kansans to the SOA may have heard John Fulmer sing this a couple of weeks ago. And this is a song from him. We need the Buddhists and the Baptists, the Quakers and Catholics too, atheists and agnostics, Muslims and Jews. We need people of all nations, all colors and all creeds, to put an end to war now, to put an end to greed. It's gonna take us all to make the change. It's gonna take us all to win the peace. It's gonna take us all in the streets. It's gonna take us all. It's gonna take us all to put an end to war. To put an end to greed. That's all. That's what we're about. Making the space for the beloved community that knows and acts together. That's all. That's what we're about. Practicing the ways that make that beloved community possible. Practicing it as we put an end to the things that get in the way of that. To the war, to the greed, to the violence, to the oppressions that support all of those. That's what we're about. Just that. Just end war. Just end violence, greed. Just end sexism and racism and heterosexism and every single other death-dealing oppression. Just disentangle ourselves from those structures, those systems that have intentionally divided us, that have intentionally infiltrated our cultures and our psyches. Not so much to ask, really. Really, it's not. Because it's about coming home to who we actually are. We are truly, at the core, part of the ecology of creation that is good, that is very good. At least that's what I think. So it's a coming home to ourselves. That's what we're about. And making space for everyone to come home. Life is too precious to settle for anything less than that. Too precious to settle for anything less than all of it. And no one of us has to do it all. In fact, we don't get to. So if you've been trying to do it all, you get to stop. In fact, you have to, because it doesn't work. Now I'm preaching to myself here, and I'm sure to one or two of the rest of you, because I know you. At least, yeah, some of you. So I work for Christian Peacemaker Teams. I was doing it while I was a pastor. I was doing it part-time, 2 months a year in Colombia, accompanying fabulous human rights organizers and communities that were standing up to paramilitaries and government forces. And then they invited me to come do it full-time, and I said, okay. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 7.5 years. And CPT is one of these sinews, I think, of this movement we're part of as this big body, and we're all cells, and maybe this is one of the sinews in the body, one of the ligaments that holds it together, and another group is a muscle over there that flexes, and another group is a I don't know, a nose or something, to smell out what's wrong. And together this movement is one body. This movement back home to the good creation, the beloved community that takes us all and leaves no one behind. Not even the 1%. Because when we get it together, we shouldn't settle for leaving them behind either. Now, they will have to change some of their habits. And that will be good news for them too. But we won't leave them behind. Nobody. So, all right, I'm going to do a brief advertisement. I said Colombia, and you've got a newsletter there, and some of you are already on the list. And over here, there's some calendars that have a beautiful picture of a wonderful community victory. It's kids jumping into water in the town of Las Pavas in Colombia. And it's a great story. And if you want to read this story, you can get the back newsletter that's on the back thing, or there's a synopsis of it on the calendar, which there are plenty of copies. It's the 2012 wall calendar. But you could also come tomorrow to Lorraine Avenue Mennonite Church at 7, and I'm going to talk about Las Pavas there. I'm not going to talk about that fabulous story tonight. I'll talk about the other projects tonight. But there's extra calendars up here, and there's some back there, so feel free to take those. And I'm going to also pass around a sign-up sheet. If you want information about Christian Peacemaker Teams, give me your contact information. If you want to be on the listserv, on the newsletter, you can either fill out one of those envelopes or fill this out. If this could be passed around while I'm talking, that would be great. So, that's the advertisement. So, stories from the work that we do. We have teams in Colombia. We also have a team in northern Iraq, and a team in Palestine, in the West Bank, in the Hebron district, the Al-Khalil area. We also have a team in Ontario. And in each of these places, we partner with communities that are receiving the brunt end of war and occupation. Not like the Occupy Wichita movement kind of occupation, the other kind. It's going to be confusing for the next little while, that word is, in our history. So I referenced the Arab Spring, and I'm losing my glasses. Part of that didn't get a lot of press, although CPT helped it get some, was what happened in northern Iraq, in Sulaymaniyah, in the KRG, the Kurdish area. That Kurdish government that the U.S. put into place, the Kurdish regional government, is really quite autocratic, very militarized. It is basically a military dictatorship. And in that context, This last spring, thousands took to the streets, demanding an end to corruption, demanding a say in what happens in their area, in Kurdish Iraq. And the government started doing two things. They sent infiltrators to incite and start acting in violent ways. And they started shooting. So they sent the people who gave the excuse, and they started shooting on the crowd. And the community of Sulamnia developed a response to this. They said, there was a group of poets, non-governmental workers, organizers, and lawyers mostly, although I think there's some other folks tossed in there that don't fit those categories, who got together and said, if a way to deal with these infiltrators, with the agitators, or the kind of not part of the protest group, but yeah, spies, but they're doing more than spies. They were throwing rocks at the military. So the way to deal with them is to actually have a kind of human barrier between the protesters and the army. And then that will help the protest group separate out folks who start throwing the rocks that are doing the instigating. It'll give a barrier. So this group formed that wall of peace, and they wanted some internationals with them, both to witness and to participate, and the CPT team was there. So it's an example of local nonviolent movement saying, this is a space in which it would be useful to us to have the world witness. And CPT provides that human connection. And then the email listserv and the news releases and all of that, the access that we have, because many of us, well, the Iraq team, frankly, at that time was from the United States, Canada, Czech Republic, and Taiwan. So it is an international movement. So the team was there, part of that wall of peace, and that's sometimes what the role of CPT is. A kind of a standing between a de-escalating presence together with local peacemakers when that's what's needed. Sometimes our role isn't a de-escalating presence, really. Sometimes our role is not instigating, because we're there with local peacemakers and we're following their lead, but being in the middle of the activist push with those local peacemakers, or in the middle of something that actually pushes the edge and raises the anxiety of the system. Something that uncovers the injustice. So an example of that, these last couple of weeks, there's been a rather new thing in the West Bank. In the Hebron district, or Al-Khalil, there's a freedom ride. I don't know whether you heard about this, but 6 Palestinians went to the bus stop in their own city. Al-Khalil, Hebron, is a city that is a vast majority Palestinian, but there are streets where Palestinians are not allowed to walk. There are buses where there's no law against them going on these buses, but the end terminal is in a section of Jerusalem where they're not allowed. And so these are called the settler roads and the settler buses, the Israeli residents of the West Bank. So these 6 activists, calling themselves freedom riders, after another movement, went to the bus stop. And they managed to get on the bus. And the bus went for a little while and then stopped. for about 45 minutes, and got on, CPTers were there to accompany, there were journalists, they'd done their organizing to make this a visible thing. The police got on, the military got on, the Israeli police, the Israeli military, the IDF. And then they sat for a while longer, and then they drove on to a parking lot where they sat for at least another hour before the police arrested the 6 for riding on the bus. Here's some of what they said. First, they quoted Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "The one who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as the one who helps perpetrate it. The one who accepts evil without protesting against it is already cooperating with it." End quote. Now, these 6 Palestinians, their own statement, what they said is, "We urge the people of the world not to accept the evil that is our occupation, dispossession, and oppression, and to divest yourselves and your governments from the corporations that enable Israel to continue doing this to us." Eged and Veolia are 2 transportation companies that serve Israel's segregated colonial infrastructure. By passively accepting their presence and not protesting against them, you are all directly complicit in the crimes they commit against us and the profits they make from the violation of our rights, violations that the freedom riders expose today. Our rights will not be voluntarily handed back to us, so we are heading out to demand them. Brave folks who deserve us to have their backs. So think about who you're invested in and what their role in the occupation of Palestinian lands are, those corporations. Another story of what CPT is about and CPT's partners are about. Sometimes our role is to make sure that we do not get in the way of the organizing that others are doing, but that we instead give steadfast but behind the scenes support and organizing. So I just got back from a week with the Aboriginal Justice Team that is based in Toronto, and one of the groups of people that I met there is a fabulous group of women. A group of women who have been organizing to expose the tip of the iceberg that they describe as genocide. A centuries old and continuing genocide of First Nations Aboriginal people in this Turtle Island, this continent. And the tip of the iceberg that they're exposing is the murder and disappearance of Aboriginal women. Over 600 First Nations women in Canada have been murdered in the last 20 years. Many of them in ways that include horrifying torture and sexual violence. Over 600 in 20 years. This is in Canada. Have you heard about it?
No.
Some people have. So there's a group that has organized an annual protest on the 14th of February that brings this to light. And women march, they take the streets. And in Vancouver, I understand, the men, particularly settler men, white men, have decided to organize to support this women's march as kind of a counterbalance, both symbolic and real, support when it's mostly white settler men, settler being European settlers in this continent. I'm certainly one of those, although I'm not a man, but are the ones doing the murdering. Well, this group of settler men have organized to create a space where the women come after the march. A warm space, because it's February, a space where there's plenty of room for the voices of the women to be heard and to hear each other, and where there is good food and warm drink. So the men are doing that work, which is lovely because the role turns sexism a little on its head. And in Toronto last week, the women who've been organizing the Toronto Yearly March said, "Men of Toronto, step up to the plate." And it's the CPT team's men who raised their hands. Fast. They were great. I was so proud. It was like, oh, good. And they cook well. So that'll work. So sometimes it's the behind-the-scenes support and organizing. And sometimes it's right up front there on the bus taking pictures and sending those news releases. And sometimes it's in the line that might be the line of fire between in order to de-escalate. Escalating, de-escalating is sometimes your role here too. Our role here too. When is the time to calm things down? In my experience, that is less commonly the under-accessed mode here inside of North America's organizing. Although there are times, I don't know if you've seen the recent video from Occupy Davis, California. A row of people consciously, nonviolently committing what some of us call holy obedience and sometimes we call civil disobedience, willingly risking arrest, kneeling and sitting, and the police officer cavalierly spraying them right in the face with pepper spray. Just like he's, I don't know, spraying insecticide on plants. It's about as, well, that's probably equally violent too. But no, like it was just when I saw the gesture, it was like, ah! And the group, the Occupy group, responded with, "Who do you serve?" Can you repeat that back as if you were, who do you serve?
Who do you serve?
Who do you protect?
Who do you protect?
And over and over, who do you serve?
Who do you serve?
Who do you protect?
Who do you protect?
So that's, throwing the police's mottos back at them, right? And then the chant shifted to shame, shame, shame on you. And the spirit, was getting very tense. And in the video, you could just see the fear. You could see the batons being held really tightly. You could see they have these guns that look like machine guns. They launch canisters of tear gas being raised at the crowd instead of down here. And it was one of those moments where organizers, where experienced people who have put themselves on the line and developed the sense of what is the timing here, what is the call right now, determined this is a time to shift the energy. And someone said, mic check. Mic check.
Mic check.
So that people's mic was activated. And the next thing was, we are willing
We are willing
to give you a brief moment
to give you a brief moment
of peace. And in the video, you could see the soldiers, the police, relax. The gun went down a little bit. The grip loosened a little bit. You may take your weapons.
You may take your weapons
And our friends.
and our friends
And go.
and go.
Please do not return.
Please do not return.
We are giving you
We are giving you
a moment
a moment
of peace.
of peace.
We are giving you
We are giving you
a moment
a moment
of peace.
of peace.
You can go.
You can go.
We will not follow you.
We will not follow you.
You can go.
You can go.
You can go.
You can go.
Watch the video. They pulled back. They pulled back. And finally you could tell someone gave the order and they walked away.
Wow.
Just like that. You can go. We have the voice that can say to the forces that are being used for violence. We have the voice that can return the humanity to the human beings who are being used as tools of violence. You can go. We will give you a moment of peace. But only after we have stepped up to uncover the greed and the violence. Because unless we are willing to step up, then we don't belong in the de-escalating role. We're not going to be trustworthy for it. So figure out here in Wichita when it's yours to step up, and then when it's yours to be reaching out to somebody with a gun who's getting nervous, or somebody with a bank who's getting nervous, or whatever it is. Some way to give them back their humanity that got lost in the system. What's the schedule of Occupy Wichita this week? Say it out loud. Say it out loud.
Same as usual.
Right, but has everyone here been there yet? Maybe most have, some. Make the announcement. Come on, I'm giving you
12
space.
o'clock noon.
Uh-huh.
Noon tomorrow, we're having a GA in the library,
On the third floor.
third floor.
So General Assembly, library, 3rd floor, noon tomorrow. It's not even going to be cold
It's not gonna be cold?
in the library.
Right. We're supposed to have freezing rain, that's why.
Yeah. But noon on Saturdays, and if there's, is there anybody who's not on the listserv that tells people where to go on Saturdays?
Yeah. They have my email, but I don't get any email.
How do people find out?
Hang around.
And
Oh, yeah, there's a whole garage of website, Facebook page,
Mm-hmm.
multiples, this and that, and it's mainly whoever shows up with the sign.
All right. So if anybody here doesn't know how to figure out how to get in that loop, we've got some people talking in this corner that you can connect with. Step up. Sunflower's been stepping up for a long time. The Peace Center has been stepping up for a long time. Step up to show what's wrong and then to de-escalate when it's time to. It takes us all, and it takes everyone in this room. So one more verse from John Fomer, and then I'll be quiet for a little bit, much as I ever am. You need your friends and your neighbors, the poets and the painters, socialists and anarchists and pacifists and humanists, every culture and community. It takes black and white and brown. Sometimes we won't see eye to eye, but we stand on common ground. It's gonna take us all to make the change, take us all to win the peace. It's gonna take us all in the streets. It's gonna take us all. It's gonna take us all.